And that says that the marginal benefit curves that we're talking about here should be shifted to the right in that world in which they put some aesthetic value on the rural or country landscape. Make sense intuitively? Okay, OECD is an organization of developed countries that does frequent studies evaluating distortions and what the consequences of distortions are. And in the 1980s and 1990s, OECD and GATT, which has now become the WTO, all recognized that globally the distortions in agriculture and food production were greater in terms of their welfare consequences than any other economic sector. So there was a real attempt to reform the policies, and it turns out that Austria, Finland, and the Netherlands all attempted to take into account the negative externalities by introducing a variety of pricing on those externalities, input taxes, input levies, and their ultimate goal was to internalize the environmental cost of chemical and fertilizer use. In addition, in selected countries, agricultural supports have been completely eliminated, in 2 countries in particular, New Zealand and Australia. Now, one of the reasons that they've eliminated the agricultural support that they'd previously historically implemented is because as globalization began to take place, they had a comparative advantage in producing a lot of food items. So they wanted to be as efficient as possible to compete on global markets. New Zealand, in particular, abolished all of their supports, and the result of this experiment was fertilizer use declined, the farms became more diversified. Those of you who kept abreast of the work of Michael Pollan, for example, has argued about the monoculture and the risk associated with monoculture. Well, New Zealand, when they eliminated the supports, the public sector supports, then created incentives for the operations themselves to diversify their operations, their enterprises, rather than relying on the government to, in effect, provide them insurance on the downside. And moreover, marginal lands were grazed less intensely, and similar outcomes took place in Australia as well. And the conversion of land into agricultural uses was largely terminated. And we all know there's a great debate going on in Brazil right now with regard to reclaiming forest land for agricultural production in the Amazon in particular. And the government has recently come out in support of the continuation of that conversion to agricultural lands. Okay, now let's turn to water resources. We want to look at both the efficient allocation of water as well as the pollution that takes place of water, lowering water quality, and what sorts of policies are out there that the public sector should pursue with regard to mitigating against degradation of water quality. A few questions that we're going to address. Why is water a scarce resource? Anybody that's spent any time on the Atlantic Ocean doesn't feel as though it's a scarce resource, right? Turns out it is. How can surface water be efficiently allocated? How can groundwater be efficiently allocated? These are the 2 principal medias of water, both surface water and groundwater. And in many parts of the world, there's conjunctive use between the 2. The efficient allocation, how is it different for groundwater versus surface water? What are the different sources of inefficiency in water use? What are the potential remedies to correct for those inefficiencies? In addition, with regard to pollution, we want to look at the unique characteristics of water pollution and how that differs from our discussion about air pollution. The actual measure of marginal damages or marginal control costs could be much the same, but the science is dramatically different. What are the main water pollution control policies that have been adopted historically in the United States? Are these policies cost effective? Surprise, surprise, no. What are the potential problems of the current policies and how can they be reformed or corrected to ensure either cost effectiveness, that is to say, achieving specific targets at minimal cost, or if I don't have specific targets, then maximizing what will turn out to be marginal net benefits. All right, a few definitions. Surface water is a renewable resource. Watersheds, lakes, composed of lakes, rivers, streams, reservoirs. And it's a renewable resource in large part because, thank God, we have rainfall. Otherwise, it wouldn't be renewable. Instead, it would be exhaustible. Groundwater is water that collects below the surface in aquifers. Now, there's huge variation. Some aquifers are renewable. Why? Because they have an active recharge from other sources, seepage through the soil into the aquifer. There are other groundwaters that are exhaustible resources. That is to say, the depletion rate is much higher than the recharge rate, and it's just a matter of time before the available resource is completely depleted. Okay? All right, so now, why is water scarce? Our first question. Only 2.5% of the total volume of water is fresh water. Now, salt water only has value if you can use modern technology to desalinate that water to make it fresh water, and that turns out to be very costly. And only 1% of all the freshwater sources have been identified as available for human consumption and consumption within ecosystems. 90% of the world's readily available freshwater resources is groundwater, and many of the aquifers that hold that body of water are depletable resources. Seasonality becomes a critical issue with regard to having water available during critical times of demand. And there's also the question about geographical distribution. Deserts are deserts because they don't have access to fresh water. Tucson, Arizona doesn't have sufficient water. Las Vegas, Nevada doesn't have sufficient water. And even though they didn't have sufficient water, they overbuilt, right? As a result, they deserved what they got with regard to all the foreclosures that have taken place in and around Las Vegas.